of my mind. I want it bad. We on the green list, you seen this, don't go give them more. Are you sure you're gonna be pleased for me when I'm no longer giving you my time? Are you sure you wanna speak for me? That privilege safe for family ties. But I wrote it quiet, I moved tonight. Whenever I'm sleeping, as I'm trying to say it. And I get what I want, and never it's twice. Hear me repeating things I'm not so quiet. What kind of laugh, bad, just like you sending me. Think I ain't freeing. No, you ain't dead. What's the name of shop you used to bag at? You think of it and get dead. Are you sure you're gonna be pleased for me?
We'll be starting in a little bit, just waiting for a few more people to come on in.
Are you sure you wanna speak for me? That baby safe for family ties. But I would it's quiet. I move to 999 whenever I'm sleeping. As I'm trying to say, and I get what I want. I know it's twice. If you hear me repeating things, I'm not so quiet. Practice makes perfect. I don't care about no when I'm working. Cut you off if it happened, you deserved it. Can't sit, stand in the way of mine. I got no safety embedded. I'm still green, not clever. You knew who you were, but I thought I knew better. Same old ways, I've been frustrated. Wish I had more fucking patience. Are you sure you're gonna be pleased for me when I'm no longer giving you my time? Are you sure you wanna speak for me? The privilege safe for family ties. But the word is quiet, hey. I move for 999 whenever I'm sleeping. So I'm driving on sight, and I get what I want. And that's twice. If you hear me repeating things, I'm not so quiet. But the word is quiet. I move for 999 whenever I'm sleeping. Yes, I'm Joey on sight. And I get what I want. I never ask twice. If you hear me repeating things, I'm not so quiet.
Well, hello, everybody. Hello. Welcome to the Tuesday Womxnhouse Talk Series featuring Ashleigh Coren. Yay! We're super excited to have her joining us and to talk more about her career as an amazing art professional. This virtual talk series includes remarks from established BIPOC art professionals from across the U.S. The conversation will, highlight their achievements and as visionaries, artists, curators, and creative placemakers in their field and in their communities. This is an artist talk based on, our Womxnhouse Detroit Artist Residency, which is an inclusive artist residency to support BIPOC women and non-binary artists and curators as part of an initiative to build Detroit neighborhoods. This residency is very dear to me, and it provides housing, studio space, stipends, exhibition space, and access to innovative networks, all providing a platform and space for resources for artists and curators of color. So I'm super excited to have Ashleigh join us. Ashleigh is the acting head of education for the Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative and the Women's History Content and Interpretation Curator at the National Portrait Gallery. In her role, she facilitates nuanced conversations about the history of women in America. Please welcome Miss Amazing Ashleigh Coren.
Hey, how's everyone doing?
Well,
hello.
So nice to meet everyone.
Hey, how are you?
Good. It's Tuesday, y'all. 3 more days to go.
Yes.
Until when? Okay, I'll come back. The weekend? Everyone's order and I'll get
Can't come soon enough.
Okay.
All right, should I jump in, Asia?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just jump right in, get
Okay.
started. This is a very casual conversation. We want you to just please tell us more about you and your career as a fabulous art professional.
Awesome. And I'm the type of person where if, there's something that you have a question about, just holler. This is, like Asia said, this is supposed to be as informal as possible. So I'll keep it as informal as I possibly can. But first off, I want to say thank you to Asia and thank you to all of you for coming here tonight. And thank you for inviting me into this space. As someone who studies women's history for a living, the fact that something like this exists to me is so dope. But it also harkens me back to like old school, like women's collectives in the 60s and 70s and 80s. So it's nice that you're sort of carrying out this tradition of women coming together, artists coming together in shared space, but sharing testimonies. And given the world that we live in at this moment, I think spaces like this are incredibly important. And it's really important to have safe spaces for women and non-binary people that encourage not just self-discovery, and growth, but also innovation, right? Because this is a space of innovation where all of you all are coming together to create wonderful, amazing things. So thank you. So as Asia said, my name is Ashleigh Coren. I work at the Smithsonian, and as the acting head of education for the Smithsonian's American Women's History Initiative, which is kind of like, so right now the Smithsonian is actually building a women's history museum. It'll be out in 10 to 20 years, so stay tuned. You know how that works. It takes a long time to build the space. But I basically develop, evaluate, and deliver the American Women's History Initiative educational vision by cultivating experiences, activities, programs, and digital products for both educators and the public. I also work in the National Portrait Gallery as an interpretation curator, which means that I'm a storyteller. So I use NPG collections to connect people and ideas to different moments in history in different stories. I do lots of other stuff like curating, which we'll talk about a little bit later outside of my work at the Smithsonian. But I'm actually a trained librarian and archivist by practice. So I am not someone who has a PhD in art history. I don't have an MA in museum studies. I actually have an MS in archival science. And that actually informs everything that I do. Because the core of archival and library work is information. That's the core of what library work is, right? So how we produce information, how we consume information, how we evaluate information, and then how do we share information, which is literally what an artist does, right? Y'all are both producing new forms of information, you're communicating ideas, and you're sharing that information with the world. So let's start from the beginning. I'm from Boston. So I'm not from DC area. I'm from one of the coldest places on earth, Boston, Massachusetts. But both of my parents, my mother and my father are actually from the South. So I'm first generation Bostonian. My parents are from the deep South. So like we're talking about like picking cotton, outhouses, living on farms, that sort of thing. And so I grew up in Boston, but I grew up with no concept of fine art or museums. Actually, the fact that I'm doing what I'm doing in this moment makes me laugh every single day, because there is no way that 30 years ago or 20 years ago, you would have told my Black ass that I would be like at a major museum doing this work. That is like not what that was not what I thought I was going to be doing, because I had no relationship with art growing up. And I went to museums, but when you go to museums and you're like 8, like you just go and they push you around and maybe you see some stuff and maybe you think it's cool and maybe you don't. Like I had no sort of intellectual or emotional connection to what it was that I was seeing, and the people who were taking me to museums didn't provide that for me or for the other Black and brown children that I was going to museums with. So I had no real relationship to museums. To me, museums were about things like old things that you dug up. That's what a museum was. It housed old things that people dug up or had like in their attics. And other than what I saw on TV or the art that was in my family's home, I had very little exposure to the art world. And my parents are like incredibly intelligent, worldly people, but I'm a Black child of the 80s and the 90s. So like that wasn't the focus. The focus was being a tennis player like Arthur Ashe, being a lawyer, right? Being a doctor, those are the things that like you did, right? There was no concept like the way that we have now of thinking about developing well-rounded children, right? Now there's museums are a little bit more accessible to kids and schools, but back then they weren't necessarily developing those partnerships. And it was much more of a sort of guarded space that had lots of barriers to it. They were even more inequitable and elitist than there are now, if you can imagine that. And my consumption of visual culture was just mostly television and movies, not necessarily art objects. But I did grow up, however, with a really deep sense and interest in Black and women's history, which really informs who I am as a person. So in addition to that, in addition to not really having a relationship with museums, I also like really hated art class. Like I absolutely hated art class. Like to this day, if you ask me to do like arts and crafts, like I will shit a brick because I hate it. So I'm not even joking. Like I do story time at the portrait gallery and we have to like cut out like construction paper to do vocabulary words. And I have like an existential crisis every single time I have to do it. Like it's really bad. And I don't like anything. Like I don't like ceramics, drawing, photography. Like I cannot and I will not, which is why I have so much respect for art makers, because I cannot, like that is not my, that is not why I was put here on this earth to create art. That is not why I'm here. And so it's just, like I said, it's to me, it blows my mind that I am doing what I am doing in this particular moment in time. Because if you had asked me or looked at me, you'd be like, this child, like this little girl is going to be in a, like, what? Her? But see, that's life, right? Like life takes you to so many different places. And the thing about the art world that's so special is that you don't necessarily have to have a relationship with art or grow up with it in order to pursue it as your practice, to pursue it as your passion, right? For a lot of people, it's something that they find later on in life. I'll talk a little bit later about a show that I have open outside of Boston. And one of the painters is a 66-year-old woman who didn't start painting until 3 years ago. She didn't do anything. She had an accident and then she couldn't do anything because she couldn't move, but she could paint. And that's how her career started. So I think the great thing about art and art practice is that there's no right way or one way to be affiliated or to start. It's just about who you are and where you are in life. So like I said, not an art person at all. And then all of this changed when I went to college. So I went to a liberal arts college in New England. And for those who can remember, there was a time where not everybody had internet access in their homes. Like some of us like literally had to go to the library or, go to school to get internet access. So the thing I didn't realize about college is that if you wait too long, the classes that you want to take will no longer be available. So my freshman year, I waited a little bit too long. I had to take a freshman year, one of those freshman year seminars, and there were 2 classes left. And it was like a cancer biology class and a woman in art class. I was definitely not going to take the cancer biology class because that's another area that I cannot deal with, sciences. So I took this woman in art class and I took it with some apprehension because I just assumed that it was going to be, like white marble sculptures and tapestries and Renaissance painting and history painting. And that's not what it was. It wasn't like that at all. My professor at the time, Rebecca Corey, taught a class that was about race. It was about consent. It was about sexuality. It was about class. It was about the environment. And that was the first time someone showed me what art could be and what it could represent. That art wasn't just about like, art is an object, but art is so much more than just an object, right? But I was 18 years old. This is like 18 years old worth of living and then coming to this realization. And that's something that I always keep in mind when I work with audiences at the portrait gallery, is that it doesn't matter how old someone is or where you think someone comes from. Like you have to be very, very intentional when you talk about art objects, because you might be introducing someone to something that they've never even thought about before, or no one's even showed them. And someone thankfully showed me at the age of 18 what art could be. And art history is, to me, will always be, it's sociology, it's political science, it's anthropology, it's philosophy. That is my relationship to art objects, or to objects in general, because now I both work with art and historical objects. And it took me a really long time to think about sort of process and format, because like I said, my brain does not work that way. But once I got to a point where I understood that the value of something is not just the story that it tells, but also thinking about the artistic process and thinking about the artist, I think it really enhanced the way I think about what art means in our society, but also what happens when you take art away, right? Which has become increasingly important. What happens when we remove art from conversations, which we should never do. Because at the end of the day, what I'm interested in is what is being expressed and who is expressing it, and that matters. So fast forward 4 years. And then the one thing I wanted to mention is that the first major art history paper I ever wrote was about these 3 artists. I don't know if you recognize any of them, but we have Elizabeth Catlett on the left. That is Negro Espelo 2. From 1969. We have Adrian Piper in the middle. I don't know if you're familiar with Adrian Piper's work. Please, if you have not seen her work is phenomenal. She does a lot with performance as well. And this is Let's Talk from Portfolio 10 from 1995. And of course, on the right is The Love of My Life, Faith Ringgold, who's not just an artist, she's also a children's book writer. I'm sure you might have seen Tar Beach. Among other things. This is actually a poster she did for the US Department of Labor called Working Woman from 1995. And these 3 women really helped center my practice when I was starting out as an art historian, really thinking about how people use art to start dialogue, but also how people use art to start some shit, like to really fuck people up, like to really ask tough questions. And not just questions of white people, but questions of people within their own community, right? Like, how is art being used to ask tough questions within our own communities? But particularly within the context of Catlett and Ringgold, how is art being used as an expression of joy, as an expression of pride, of identity, pride in your ancestors, pride in the cultures that you are a part of or want to be a part of? And so that's why I love these 3 women so much, because they really encompass my relationship to art objects. So I graduated from college. I don't have a full-time job because I'm first generation, and no one tells you that you have to spend your years in college networking. Like, I didn't know that. Like, it's not something that people explain to you, right? That you need to network while you're in college. And I worked part-time at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston. But, you know, one of the things that's really difficult is, and I don't mean to generalize, but I think, you know, a part of networking is also, it's also about the loss of ego in a lot of ways, because a big part of networking is making yourself vulnerable to other people and putting yourself out there, which is something that's very difficult for a lot of us. Like, it's very difficult for you to put yourself out there and to ask for help, or to ask for connection. It's hard for anybody, but I think it's really hard for many of us who didn't grow up in that sort of in those social spaces. We were just used to asking someone for a connection or a favor in a professional sense, I should say. And so it was really hard for me to grasp the art world. I tried living in New York City. I lived in New York City for a year, but I don't know if y'all have been to New York City, but the art world, both then and now, is a shit. Like, it's cutthroat as fuck. Like, it's one of those cities where, like, you really have to be okay with rejection. You really have to be okay with trying and trying and trying again. You have to be okay with the fact that sometimes you actually have to settle for something less in order to get to where you need to get to. And I'm not built like that. Just being honest with you, I'm not built like that. I like stability. I like having a steady paycheck. I like knowing that I have health insurance. So I tried the New York thing and it was not for me. Like, I'm not about that unpaid internship life while waitressing. Like I want Blue Cross Blue Shield, and I want, I want all of those things. But it's also hard for many of us. It's hard if you're a person of color to navigate the art world. Like I said, it's very elitist, lots of gatekeeping, but also it's just emotionally taxing for people to not recognize your talents, for people to sometimes treat you like a token. And at the time when I was graduating from college, the only Black person that most people knew was Thelma Golden. No one knew of any other. I mean, this is like 2007. So there weren't like a lot of, like, there's way more visibility now than there was 15 years ago. But a lot of white people, like, they had no frame of reference for Black and brown professionals in the art world. They knew what the Studio Museum was, they knew what other museums were, but it wasn't a part of their practice. It was like something on the outside. And so that's really what I experienced when I was in New York, is like constantly feeling like I was on the outside. And that doesn't mean that there are people who weren't successful. I had friends who were people of color who got jobs, but it wasn't a lot of them. And they really had to sort of work for it, or they had parents who could pay for them to do the unpaid internships and sort of work their way up the sort of food chain. And so actually, I thought about maybe leaving, but then I decided to make the decision that many young people do when they don't know what to do: go to grad school. And so I briefly pursued a master's degree in art history, and it actually ended up really poorly. I ended up hating art through the experience, because it was about, getting stuff done rather than immersing yourself in practice. It was about just like, getting through certain courses, which is very different than my undergraduate experience, which is more about like art as this like discursive thing, versus like, oh, you got to take a class in Renaissance, or you got to take a class in this. And there wasn't any real sort of conversations happening in between my courses. Like it was just sort of really separate. And there weren't any classes about Black people while I was there. A lot of it is, taking courses that are based on what your professors are writing their books on, and none of them are writing books about Black people. So I just got kind of stuck. And so I ended up not finishing, which is something that I'm actually really proud of. A lot of people, they give me shit for not finishing the degree, but like for my mental health, but also for my career, I needed to leave. It wasn't worth it. It just was not worth it. And to this day, I'm glad that I left, because I think if I had stayed the entire time, I really would have resented art. Like I really would not have had a good relationship with the art world. But thankfully, when I was there, I ended up pursuing librarianship and archives. I went to UVA. I was living in Charlottesville, which I do not recommend. I ended up working on the sort of local Black history project, and really started immersing myself in the archival world, and could sort of see the similarities between archival work and museum work, right? They're both object-based, but archival work is really centered in history and really centered in preserving, but also sharing stories. And so I ended up actually pursuing a degree in archival science in Boston, and then sort of bounced around for a while. And then ended up at the University of Maryland, where I taught primary source literacy. So primary source literacy is how do you find, evaluate, and use primary sources? And what's great about special collections is that, there's art, there's ephemera, there's photography. And so a big part of my job was sort of using photography to have conversations about history and culture. So for instance, because it was in Maryland, we actually had a really fabulous collection about the 1968 uprising in Baltimore. Some people refer to it as the riots, but we refer to it as the 1968 uprising. We actually had photographs of when the city was under siege. And I would talk to students about sort of the different photographs and what we could learn from the photographs. So I was slowly becoming re-engaged with visual objects. And then ultimately, the job at the Smithsonian that I have now was sort of brought to my attention. I didn't really think I was going to return to museum work. But the job that I have now is this really great intersection, like I said, of history, art, and culture, and using museum objects to understand the contributions of women in history, but to also understand all of the complicatedness of being a woman in America. And I mean, thinking about not just gender, but thinking about our bodies, thinking about intersectionality, thinking about how all of the things that we live with, right? Violence, joy, sexuality, environment, even shit like space, right? Like thinking about how all of those things inform how we live now, how we lived in the past, but also how we will continue to live in the future. So that's what I do for a living. I use museum objects to have these sorts of conversations. And I'm really glad, because I think returning to the museum world after a huge absence, because I wasn't fully embedded in the world, I think it brings a different perspective that I probably would not have had if I'd stayed. So before I move on, I just want to see if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, I'm interested to, that's just the way that you put that, that you use these objects to tell the stories of those women or of those, situations and circumstances. And you might get ready to elaborate on that. Are there any particular, artifacts or something that tells a poignant story?
Yeah, so I didn't use this as an example, but one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that I'm interested in creating digital projects to disseminate information, right, about women's history. So actually a few weeks ago, the Smithsonian has a podcast called Side Door, and I helped to produce and write an episode of Side Door, which is based on the story of this woman from DC, this Black woman from DC who in the 1950s successfully got a patent for an adjustable sanitary belt. So think about this. This is the 1950s, and a Black woman is inventing a patent or inventing a sanitary belt to make things easier for women. I don't know if you all know this, but back in the day, like the pads that women had to use were extremely uncomfortable. Think of like having to wear a jock strap with a pad. And like, that's what it was like back in the day. It was horrible. It was awful. And so here's this Black woman who's trying to create a sanitary pad with an adhesive before anybody else was. But here's the thing about Mary Kenner. She never made any money off of her invention. So she submitted this patent. A company was really interested in what she was doing, because when you submit a patent, you don't submit your race. That's one of the things that's really interesting about the Patent and Trademark Office for the United States, is that when you submit your patent for your invention, they don't ask for race. So no one knows the race of, they might know the gender, but they don't know the race of the person who submitted the patent. So this company goes to her house, doesn't realize that she's Black, freaks out, and then she never hears from them ever again. And so I wanted to share this particular story, one, to demonstrate STEM invention amongst African-American women in the 1950s, but to also bring to the conversation about success. Because one of the things that's so hard for people in my area is that we equate women's history with the people who made it, the people who were the first, the people who won awards. But like, that's only telling a part of the story. Like, we need to celebrate the people who were still innovative and still made an impact, but maybe they didn't make any money off of their invention. Maybe there's never going to be an award or, a brick or a bench or a song or a movie made after them, but their lives are still worth studying and understanding. And so that's an example of sort of the work that I do, is to really sort of move away from the RBGs, God bless her, but like, I really want to move away from like that kind of hero worship, because I think it's actually really detrimental, because as we know, RBG was actually kind of racist sometimes. And so I think that work is really detrimental, and sort of one, focusing on the women who didn't make it, but also seeing women as complex individuals, right? Mary Kenner got married 3 times to 3 different men. She had like multiple flower shops. She was a singer, like she was all over the place, but like she also was an inventor. And I think that's really cool as well. So
that's beautiful. Beautiful.
I'm going to show, it was funny. So Asia asked me to share some accomplishments. I feel like I'm still like figuring that out, because to me, an accomplishment is like making 6 figures. like that's an accomplishment, like being able to support my family. But here are the things that like people like to see like on paper. So when I was at the University of Maryland, like I said, my job was to sort of go through the stacks and pull out archival collections to sort of talk to different students and classes about history. But when I was trying to find materials for LGBTQ history, I realized we didn't have shit. Like we had very little in terms of documenting the history of LGBTQ people on the University of Maryland's campus. So I actually ended up working with the LGBTQ Equity Center to develop an oral history collection. So this is the big thing that I did at Maryland, was develop this oral history collection. And I did about half the interviews. I trained other folks to do the interviews. And this is it. It's available online. You can listen to the interviews, and they're from staff, faculty, students. But sometimes, as you all know, you got to take shit into your own hands and make the content that you need, not just for you to see and consume, but for others to see and consume, because that history might be erased if you don't do it yourself. So this is something I'm extremely proud of. There are about 17 interviews in the collection of different people documenting the history of LGBTQ people on UMD's campus. And then one of the things that I am the most proud of is, so one of the things that I've been doing at the Smithsonian is actually adding images to Wikipedia. So I've been adding CC0 images, Creative Commons, open access images to Wikipedia, because we all know that no one's going to the MPG website. Like, I don't go to the MPG website for shit. So why would anyone else go to the MPG website for shit? We know that people are going to Wikipedia, they're going to Google to find art objects. And so since 2020, they've been doing this in 2019, but since 2020, my focus has been on adding women of color to Wikipedia. And I've been working alongside the Women's History Initiative's Open Knowledge Coordinator, Kelly Doyle, who's also a Wikipedian in residence, to add more content to Wikipedia. So I personally have been a part of adding about a few hundred images on Wikipedia, and they've been viewed 16 million times by people all over the world. And not only have they been viewed 16 million times, but they've been added to 47 different language Wikipedias. And on the English Wikipedia, some of these images are the first images that you see when you open up the Wikipedia page. And so for me, this is all about education and access, right? Like bringing our collections to a wider audience, making sure that articles have images. There are some articles about Black women that don't have images at all, and we're trying to alleviate that. So when people learn about this person, they see a picture, they see an object, right? Right now, we're actually in the process of adding more images, and we're actually adding ephemera now. So when you go to the Madame C.J. Walker page, hopefully in the next month or so, you'll see an example of like a canister of grease that she used to sell, right? And for me, that's really important because that's a part about spreading knowledge. And sometimes this shit is like really random. So like we added an image of Shirley Temple last year, and like that went gangbusters. I don't know who was looking for Shirley Temple in 2021. I was like, this is weird, but like whatever. But what's great is that, these women of color, these images of women of color, so like for instance, we see Juanita Jackson Mitchell, who was a really important NAACP officer who did tons of voter registration drives in Baltimore. She was also involved with freeing the Scottsboro boys. I don't know if you're familiar with that court case of Black men in the Depression being falsely accused of rape. She was involved in that case. And then we also have, Josephine Baker, which has been immensely popular with variant audiences. And also the other women of color have been really popular too. And to me, that just shows that there's a hunger for these objects. Like people want to see more women of color, not just on Wikipedia, but just online in general. And so we have to give it to them. And then this is another example of the work that I do. So the Smithsonian has a partnership with USA Today. So my partner in crime, Chanel, who's my education assistant, we created this 12-page guide for Women's History Month of 4 dozen women from the Smithsonian collections, along with like activities for families, other things as well, which was sent out to USA Today's audience. So about 1.1 million people saw this and got this in their homes, which is pretty fabulous. But like this could be y'all in like 10 years, like someone like me, like trying to get your collections to add to this women's history guide and then sending it out to millions of people. Like that's what I think about when I do this work, right? Like, yes, we had to put in Rosa Parks because God forbid we do anything that does not involve Rosa Parks. Shout out to y'all. But, you know, it's part of it too is introducing our audiences to new stories they may not have heard of, and also contributions to women in history. So for instance, you'll see Rosa Sklaric, who's like one of the first Black women to get an architecture license in America, and is responsible for many interesting buildings in the United States. Like introducing people to those stories has been immensely important to us. Through different means. So not just lesson guides and workshops, but through other materials that can be shared really easily with a link or with a print guide out. And then I'm going to end this talk by talking about the thing that I just finished last week, which Asia is very much a part of, but I opened up my first in-person show last March at the New Arts Center in Newton, Massachusetts, which is like right outside of Boston. And the show is called Art as Solve, and there's both an in-person and an online exhibition. And the show was inspired by all the bullshit that we've had to deal with in the past 2 years, the hurt, the sorrow, the confusion, the ambiguity. And so I asked artists to respond to an open call in reference to Kara Page's concept of healing justice, which asks us, how do we holistically intervene and change the intergenerational trauma and violence that has affected Black and Brown people or immigrants in the United States? And so I asked artists to respond to that call. And I got about 36 objects, and they're fabulous. And I wanted to point out that the portrait that we're looking at is a portrait of my friend Kenya Flash, who unfortunately passed away last December. But I wanted to make sure that Kenya was in my show, watching over my show as it was happening. And I'm just really fortunate that, you know, a mutual friend of ours did a drawing of Kenya right after she passed, and I was able to have that in the show, and to be able to create a space for all different artists, right? So you have heavy hitters like Asia in the show, but you also have people who are really new to the art world, and people who only do one thing, and people who are super young and starting out. And I wanted to make sure that I had a show that had different medium and different media and like all types of things, because I wanted to show folks the breadth of the art world and what people are doing. And it's something that I'm extremely proud of, and it's done really well. It was mentioned in the Boston Globe. It's being extended for an extra 3 weeks. And the responses have been just overwhelming with people who are really interested in the subject. But because of what's in the show, there's literally something for everyone. And that's what I wanted to create. I wanted to create a show where people could walk in and there's something for the person who doesn't understand art and is really picky about it, to the person who loves abstraction and needs something, right? Like there's everything in my show. And I really used my background to sort of really create a show that said as much as possible. And so with that, I'm going to stop talking, and literally y'all can ask me anything. So.
Oh, thank you so much for that. And it was just amazing to hear about, you know, a lot of the things that you, you know, just the way that your story unraveled is very similar to mine as well. Like I got into fine art photography. I originally was going for cosmetology because my dad owned a beauty salon, and started my classes, and the cosmetology class was full, and the only thing that was left was photography and nursing. And I said, well, I definitely don't want to do nursing. And so I went ahead and went with photography. So I just thought that was so, amazing that, the way that the similarities in that, and also just coming through and seeing, for me that, for you, it was Adrian Parker. You said, was it?
Adrian Piper. Yeah.
Piper, and, some other people that really informed you. And for me, it was, Carrie Mae Weems and Laura Simpson and stuff like that. So, very similar in the way that we came through. My question, does any, like before, I'm like, oh, Asia got questions. I got some questions. So, we talked about, like objects and stuff. Are there any particular pieces that, at the Smithsonian or wherever, that are just, you live, those really,
Oh,
give you
man.
life? I know there are.
I know there's so many. I mean, so I'll just name two because there literally are so many, and you all have to come visit me, okay? Like you'll have to come visit me in DC. You have to come and I'll show you around the museum.
Maybe we should all go and check it out. Check out.
Yes, please. Please, I can all
telling me about.
I can get you into the mock too. Oh, really?
Yeah.
You said this weekend?
Let me know.
Let
me know.
Oh,
okay.
But so there's two objects that I just think are absolutely perfect. Let me see if I can. I'm gonna open one of them. But the first is actually, let's see. Do you see my avatar? If I stop my video, do you see anything?
Yes.
Okay. So that is one of my favorite women in history. That's Barbara Jordan, who is the first Black state representative from Texas. She's also a queer woman, one of the first sort of queer Black woman that we have in terms of women's history and politics that was like out. And she actually was really instrumental in the Watergate hearings. She gave a speech on national TV, and it basically changed the game for both her, but also just for Black politicians in general. And so she's just someone I love. And it's such a great, it's a photograph by Richard Avedon, actually. I don't know if you all are familiar with his work, but he does a lot of like fashion photography and other things too as well. And we actually have one of both Barbara Jordan and Shirley Chisholm by Richard Avedon that I love so much. But this is my favorite that's up. And you'll have to excuse all of my tabs. Tabs are life. But this is I Go to Prepare a Place for You by Bisa Butler. And if you're not familiar with Bisa Butler, please Google Bisa Butler after my talk. She is an extraordinary Black artist that deals with quilting and collage. So this is a portrait of Harriet Tubman. This is actually based on a photograph that was discovered only 3 years ago. So this is based on a photograph of Harriet Tubman from 3 years ago. And I wish that we could just all go see it together at the mock, because you have to be there. It's huge. So you have to be there to be able to like see it in person. But what's interesting to me is that with Harriet Tubman, a lot of the images that we see of her when she's older, a lot of photographs we have of her when she's a lot older. And so it's interesting to see her as a younger woman. But the usage of cloth, there's a conversation, there are different conversations that are going on in the cloth that she uses. So for instance, it's probably hard to see, but like there's this lion right here that sort of symbolizes the lioness that Harriet Tubman was. And then we have other references to the North Star and the usage of color and different fabrics in her face to express emotion. There's just so many things that are going on. And this is cloth. This is actually cloth from Ghana, I believe, that she imported to use for this particular object. And it's just stunning. It's absolutely stunning. And what I love about this object too is it expresses a vulnerability that we normally don't get to see, because sometimes we like I said, this hero worship, we forget that Harriet Tubman was just a person with a disability, right? She had seizures, she had headaches, right? Like this is someone with a disability who was able to save how many people? Like, and it's extraordinary. But I think sometimes we forget that she was just a person, one person, a person that was deserving of care that she gave to others, right? And that's why I really love this piece. So
beautiful. It's beautiful. Does anybody have any questions? Y'all better have some questions.
And it's totally fine. You can email me later too. I'll put my email in the chat box.
Yeah, I'm always bad at questions on the spot, like horrible. I've been trying to.
I can't lie. I would like to get the names that you had dropped at the beginning, and then also the one with Harriet Tubman, because I missed that in the area
Yeah,
I'm in.
sure.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Did Bisa do that piece specifically for the museum, or I mean?
Well, so I think so. Actually, the piece that I showed you was paid for by my initiative.
Yeah.
But I think they were. I don't know if they were working with BISA. I don't know if the African American History Museum was actually working with BISA beforehand, or whether like what the collaboration was on that one. But I wouldn't be surprised if they had commissioned this portrait from BISA.
We asked Bisa to be a part of this actually.
Oh, really?
And she said that she was doing some work with the Smithsonian. So that's full circle. Now we see it.
Wow.
Now we see it. Awesome sauce. Awesome sauce. You know, I wrote some little notes here. We talked about like, you know, in your talk, you talked about stability, you know, and you know, getting into your career, you had to do some pivoting.
Yep.
And I know that that's definitely something that I had to do as well. I've done, I went from the Easter Bunny photography, I went from
Oh my goodness.
the newspaper. I mean, I didn't work all over the place, you know, just so that I can keep the hustle and the party going. You know, what is some advice as far as, you know, I know that it's really just life that kind of takes us in these random turns, and then we end up in a place. But as an artist and wanting to stay on the path as an artist and wanting to, you know, get our work into museums and have that history, you know, what are some ideas or some things that you think that we can do to, you know, to get on that track, to go in that direction?
Yeah, I think, I mean, you're already halfway there by being a part of Womxnhouse, right? Like that's a big part of it, is like finding your people. Because I don't know about Detroit, but I know in DC, there are like artist communities, right? And they look out for one another. They keep each other abreast of, you know, exhibitions and openings, right? Like finding your people is very important. Like finding your group of people that you can rely on is super important. I think, you know, just like we talked about Asia, like there's no linear path. Like I think once you let go of the fact that there's no linear path to where you want to go to, I think it makes things a lot easier, but it also makes you a lot more open-minded to opportunities. So when you're thinking about showcasing your work, you want to be careful, right? That where you're showcasing your work aligns with your values. But sometimes you just got to show your work, right? And maybe that's like in someone's restaurant. Maybe that's in someone's coffee house. Maybe that's like in a temporary show. As long as it aligns with your values, it should, like the where, I think focusing on like the prestige, I don't think is all that important, honestly. Like, and granted, you're like, you work at the Smithsonian, like, what are you talking about? But I think that a lot of the artists that I think are really interesting, like post their work on Instagram. They're not museums, they're posting their work on Instagram, and they're showcasing their work in different types of spaces. They're not necessarily looking to the big museums to be a platform for their work. But I will say that there are, to really keep, but also to keep in mind sort of the different opportunities. So for instance, the National Portrait Gallery has a portrait competition every 3 years. And so that's a really great opportunity to sort of submit your work. And unfortunately, the deadline passed for 2022, but it's going to come back in 2025. So I think looking for, you know, national opportunities like that, where it's really an open call for folks to showcase their work, I think is really, really important. And I feel like I haven't answered your question at all.
Yes, you have. You did. And you know, we'll be looking out for that information as well. I wish I knew about it. I know that we have some amazing artists here. They would have been, they would have smashed it. They Womxnhouse ladies would have been all up in
I know.
all around. Their work is killer. You know, they'd have been in that. So thank you for, you know, informing us of that. And we're hoping that we could come and, you know, it's a small group of us. So you can give us a private tour in October for the opening of that exhibition.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for joining us.
Hi.
Hi.
I just want to make a comment. My name is Deborah Ford. I'm sorry I'm late. We had someone at the house. I just couldn't get here earlier, a meeting. But I'm an artist in Detroit. But the thing I would like for you to know, I would like for you to remember the name Geraldine Bledsoe Ford. You're with the Smithsonian, right?
Mhm.
Yes. So I'm trying to get my mother's portrait commissioned. That will happen. She was the first Black judge in the country to be elected in 1966. And she was on the bench like for 35 years. So I would just love to have her. I think she deserves to be in the Smithsonian.
Yeah, I'm looking her up right now. She seems fab. Oh, she has. Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm a judge too. We're the first mother-daughter, Black mother-daughter judges. And my daughter just got too. But she's the one that deserves it. I remember when people were laughing at us when we were campaigning for her in 66, because most women didn't have careers. And we would have to just ignore them and keep going, you know?
You know what's so interesting? Your grandmother is on Wikipedia, but your mother is not.
My grandmother is in the Women's Hall of Fame in Michigan.
Yeah. She's on, yeah. I've heard it.
Both of them. I just didn't mention her.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
I just went for my mother because I thought it was catchier. But my grandmother had a profession in the 30s. So
yep.
Yeah.
Okay. That's really cool.
Yes. I'm not all that great with social media and everything. Can I write down her information and get it to you?
I'm gonna put it in the chat box, and then maybe Asia, maybe do you mind sending my my email to the participants?
Absolutely. If you could just send them your email. Yep, absolutely. I could absolutely send that to everybody. It was one more question that I wanted to add, and that is freaking awesome, Deborah. Thanks for giving us that information. I knew that you were a judge. I didn't know that about your mom. So that's
I'm a judge. Awesome. Yeah, my mother was a judge. Her brother was too. Her father was a lawyer. It's more to it. I just went for the main one. Yeah.
That is amazing. Amazing.
Yeah. Thank you for telling us about that National Gallery portrait contest. I didn't know anything about that.
Yeah, and actually Amy Sherrill won it in 2016, and it changed her life, obviously. So we've had some really, and Amy Sherrill did the Michelle Obama portrait that we have now in the portrait gallery. So yes, I will definitely keep y'all posted.
Do you know of anything like that for abstract artists?
No, but if I will keep Asia abreast of every open call that I see from now on for y'all, just so that y'all can be a part of it. So
yeah, that's huge.
That is awesome. Thank you. Well, I mean, that's our time. I feel like I had something else to ask you, but questions, they come in and then they just go out of line, or piggyback on it. But you definitely answered the question. Oh, as far as portfolio reviews, do you do any of that when the work comes in through for a competition like the portrait or something like that?
So it's funny. So I'm not involved in all of that, but I do sit in those conversations. So I'll say a quick few things, because the National Portrait Gallery is a funky space. So because we're also a history museum, the people that come in, like the acquisitions that come in, the proposed acquisitions that come in, actually have to be vetted by our historians. So it's not just, we have a portrait of so-and-so and we think they're important. The historians actually have to do background research. And like I said, I'm a former librarian archivist. So like I already, like my tinging for like bias and other things just like go off when I hear about this. But yeah, so it goes through a process, and it actually has to be vetted by not just our historians, but also our commissioners. So our commissioners make the last call for acquisitions, which is not common throughout the Smithsonian. It's just the portrait gallery. But the portrait gallery has changed a lot. I mean, 20 years ago, you had to be dead for 10 years in order for us to collect you. So we've turned that around. So
Wow, that's pretty amazing. I always wonder about those things, and we all want to get our work in museums at some point, or have that recognition or something like that. So thank you so much for that information. Well, that is about it. I'm gonna email, or I'm gonna put Ashleigh's email in the chat and hide it at the same time so that the whole world doesn't have it. And so if you guys just hold on after I'm done recording, it'll be in the chat. But other than that, we're doing this not every Tuesday, select Tuesday. So make sure that you look out. Our next up, artist to be will be Elena Simone, who is an amazing curator and just all around business boss, art boss together. So I'm excited about her coming. And thank you so much, Ashleigh. Make sure you all check out Art as Solved. And that is, the link is in the chat. So go ahead and click it so that you can go through that virtual exhibition and experience that work. It's very powerful. I'm excited to be in it, but there are some other amazingly dope artists that's in that exhibition as well. You are the Sugar Honey Iced Tea. Thank you so much. And if you guys don't have, ladies, if y'all don't have no more questions, we're gonna close it on out. All right.
Thank you all so much. So nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
I'm about to stop recording.
Bye.
I forgot how to do it, but I'll make sure I email everybody that information.
Okay.
All right.
Awesome. Bye.
I'm gonna hit you up because I'm gonna be in Washington.